So just like,
Oh, we're live. Okay. Hi,
oh, we're live. Okay.
everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, if you're watching this, you're watching The Growing Pains of LGBTQ plus representation in games. And we're going to be talking about like the current state of representation in games and how it's kind of in a transitional phase from what I would say is very little to negative representation, but not quite to the respectful, like consistent representation that I think we're all hoping for in the future. And why is that? And what is the current state? That's all things that we're going to talk about today. Nessa's here. I just got really excited because I saw Nessa pop up. Yeah. So we're going to all introduce ourselves. I am Tori Schafer. I am a content and narrative designer at Proletariat, working on the game Spellbreak, which is currently in beta, which is a PvP game, doing the narrative design and content design for that, and like what that's going to look like. I used to work for Elder Scrolls Online, which is an MMORPG, in the past as a writer and narrative designer. Let's go to this way. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Zaire. I'm a writer and narrative designer for games, comics, and tabletop games. Right now, my big project is my Afropunk fantasy horror Kickstarter called The Bone Herder, and it's doing really well, and that's really exciting, and I'm excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Sisi. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm actually the developer behind Line Killer, which was nominated for the Independent Games Festival Excellence in Narrative, which is kind of like the Sundance of video games, which is how I describe it to most people. I've also shipped Signs of the Sojourner, which is a conversational deck building game that's currently on Steam right now, and I'm also working on some other projects that I'm still working on. So there we go.
Yes, my apologies. Pronouns she, her.
She, her.
And I'm also she, her, and my name is Emily Grace Buck. I'm the narrative director on The Waylanders, which Gato Studio, which just dropped into early access last week. Please go check it out and play it and let us know what you think of it. It's still a little bit broken, but I'm really excited about where it's going. I also worked on Destruction All-Stars, which is a title coming up for the PlayStation. And before that, I was at Telltale Games, worked on a number of projects there, including The Walking Dead, the final season, both seasons of Batman, Guardians of the Galaxy, and The Walking Dead Michonne.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to get right into it. So thinking first about like, AAA, like what is the current state of LGBTQ plus representation in specifically AAA games? Emily, if you want to start that conversation.
Absolutely. So I think we're starting to see a lot more LGBTQ characters in AAA games, which is really exciting. I mean, The Last of Us just came out this week, obviously. I think that's what many people probably watching this right now are playing. And queer stories are starting to be in extremely mainstream projects, which is really exciting. We're at a bit of a crossroads, though. Those queer stories are often centered around romance for the player character. We don't tend to see a whole lot of queer stories outside of how those queer characters relate to the person that the player is inhabiting. It's also a bit tricky that those queer stories mostly are not centered around things other than romance or other characters. We also usually see them for white characters, and we definitely are not seeing a whole lot of trans, asexual, or intersex narratives in our AAA games yet. It's good that we're seeing more queer representation. I mean, I think people have been starving for that for a long time. I know I have, and it was amazing a number of years ago when we started getting things like BioWare romances and all of that, but I don't know how far we've moved past that yet. We don't really have the casually queer characters on a large scale, the ones where the fact that they're queer doesn't impact their storyline or their growth arc. We still see queer characters put into really dangerous or even tortuous situations to be saved by the protagonist or killed off for plot lines. And I think the main thing we need to see is just more. studios are trying. There are a surprisingly large number of LGBTQ game developers. I think that a lot of fans would be shocked to find out just how many queer people worked on their favorite games. You know, games are enjoyed a lot of the time by people who feel like they're on the margins of society, and that doesn't just mean a teenage dude in a basement. That can mean anyone who's looking for themselves, looking to escape, looking for fantasy, looking for fun. So that includes a lot of queer people, especially queer people who, you know, congregate in areas like fan fiction communities online, centered around very, very big budget games. So a lot of them end up working in the industry. But when you're working in AAA as a queer person, there's kind of only so much you can do. And that is a very sad thing to have to say. But depending on how open your company is, you may or may not be able to put LGBTQ characters into the game at all. You may not be able to put them in a substantial way. You may not be able to advocate for them to have a really strong plot line centered around something other than, oh my goodness, this character's gay, or oh my goodness, this character's trans. Let's ask them 17 questions specifically about their transness instead of everything else about them. Because you can only fight so many battles until you start having issues in the workplace. Now, there are some companies that are really, really open to this. I'm very lucky. Gato Studio that I'm working with now, I went in and I said, hey, I want to make a non-binary character. And they were like, cool. I said, hey, I want to make a bunch of characters bisexual or queer. They're like, great, let's do it. And it hasn't been a fight at any point in time. That's not always the case. And Gato's a larger size indie studio. It's not a full AAA. So I think we're going to continue to see this grow in AAA, but right now there's still far too much tokenization of the queer characters. You can tell some of them are there because they want to make sure they have a queer character, which is, I mean, it's good that they want to have a queer character, but one character can't be load bearing for an entire, you know, huge marginalized people that has so many different facets, especially when that character is often a white person. We've just got a long way to go. And I'm sure everybody else has thoughts on that too in this chat. So I'll stop talking now and let someone else provide their perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Emily and I have the developer perspective, but maybe Sisi and Zaire could talk about the like consumer perspective from here. Like,
I mean, I'm
what have
also
you
a
guys...
developer.
Yeah. Oh,
so.
I'm so sorry. Like indie versus AAA versus. Sorry about that. Like, yeah. Totally 100%. But what do you guys see within AAA specifically representation at the moment?
I know. Go ahead.
Okay. I know for myself that I've been noticing when there are LGBTQ plus characters, they often are like a catalyst versus a actual person. I've noticed lately they've been a little bit more fleshed out, but they're like, oh no, my girlfriend or my boyfriend died, I'm gonna go avenge them. Or I noticed they're like a means of like comfort or a redemption arc rather than standing on their own 2 feet as like an actual fleshed out character. And again, like Emily was saying, I would definitely like to see more queer characters of color, not just just a white queer character. I would like to see more people that look like me, and the like spectrum that comes with that.
Okay, guess it's my turn. As I was actually thinking about how like not okay, so I guess I'm the only. I guess like I'm one of the few. Actually, no. Actually, I'm sorry. I guess I can provide some context about like non-binary characters because like I'm just kind of like looking at a lot of non-binary characters we have in like major games and thinking, wow, they have a mask on the entire time, or they're not really like a human character, or like they're not really like they're not really like to me like they're like obscured in some way, or they're like mysterious in some way. I'm like, no, sometimes non-binary people stuff their faces with pizza and smear like pepperoni all over their bottom lip, just like everyone else. But for some reason, like a lot of like there's just not like a lot of like humanization that I feel of a lot of non-binary characters. I personally think that Violet from Fire Emblem Three Houses is very clearly non-binary, for like a lot of different reasons. And I was into that because it was like, wow, it's a character that has like an actual like human personality and like human lifestyle instead of just like mask on the entire time and like a very mysterious background and like from a very mysterious culture or something. So to me, like the humanization is just as important as saying like, oh, this character uses they, them. And I was like, great, but what else do I know about them? Because I currently don't really know a lot about them. So that's kind of where I'm approaching from. And what also makes me kind of frustrated about a lot of representation for like queer characters of color is that there's a lot of characters that are like basically white gay people, but with like an Asian, they look Asian and like their background is like they were born in so-and-so Asian country, but like their base personality and the way they interact with the world is so white that I'm like, I can't see myself in this. The only game I've ever vaguely seen myself in was Butterfly Soup, which was designed by like an actual Asian American developer. Otherwise, I'm just like, I can instantly, like your audience can instantly tell if they are a queer person of color that this character is like clearly like a white gay, but like with like an ethnic face. So to me, that's kind of like almost like queer yellow face in a way. So that's kind of like my general like sentiment about it.
Yeah. So let's jumping on to kind of like indie perspective on that. Sisi, since you're like, our resident indie expert, since you have written your own game, developed your own game, how do indie games differ from AAA representation, and like from what you've seen and your own experience creating that representation within your own game?
Well, indie is a broad umbrella, right? Like there's certain genres that are more popular for queer developers than others. Like for example, there's not as many queer real time strategy games or like queer first person shooters as much. I mean, there's definitely some, but like as a genre, like it's not as broadly like represented. And I think part of like the big problem that we have in indie right now is that these game formats that are overwhelmingly like have queer developers, that queer developers dominate, that queer developers innovate the most. These genres are typically not as respected. Like for example, visual novels or interactive fiction, certain mobile games. And like there's this I don't know, did I say interactive fiction? Maybe. But like the problem is that when a genre becomes too saturated with a lot of with a lot of queer developers, it becomes less prestigious. So to me, like that's also a problem of like, do we value like genres that are more accessible to queer people, that they've been making games this entire time? Because if you really dug into some of these queer formats, you'd be mind blown at some of the innovations around like consent, around like things like design, or like narrative, or even like non-linear structures or like linear structures. All these things you can find innovation, but it's just that the people who work in these genres are typically very underpaid, or they're not paid at all, or they're not taken seriously by publishers, or they're like passed over as not real developers and professional opportunities. So it's very important to acknowledge that all this innovation, that the queerness that you want is there. It's just that, is anyone going to give us money? And a lot of the times the answer is no.
Yeah. Can I jump off of that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I was like sucking up all the air in the room.
No, you're fine. You're absolutely right. And I think it's really frustrating because especially when it comes to narrative systems, like you were mentioning consent systems and a lot that's going on in IF, AAA takes from that. We see what people are doing in those more queer indie spaces, and then AAA evolved based on mechanics that are coming from that place. But then we get the accolades for, oh my God, we changed everything, we did it. When no, we stole it and iterated on it and used it and didn't necessarily pay the people who actually made it, because so much of the time too, a lot of people in that space either specifically chose not to go the AAA route because working in AAA can have some downsides like layoffs and terrifying crunch and workspaces full of, mostly cis straight white men. Or they were in AAA and they understandably burnt out of it because of all of those stressors. So the fact that a lot of people in that space are coming up with amazing things and then it's kind of getting shuffled up the chain and they're not getting the credit just sucks. And it's not fair. And I don't quite know the answer to that right now. But I hope more people talk about it. Thank you for bringing it up.
When I was talking on Monday, a panel just full of industry professionals and their experience, being LGBTQ plus and like working on games, the point was brought up that like, yes, characters in the community are like very welcome that representation, but if you truly want to tell that story in a way that only a game can truly do it, you have to be a member of that community. It's just, if you want to tell that story, it's not really a cisgendered, person or a straight person. Like saying that story, not being a member of that community, it's just, it's just not going to feel as real and as good. And that's why when you go to indie and you see all the developers that are in the community and are members, and they are not just creating games because they want to create representation, they want to represent themselves. That's where you get that authenticity. That's where you get that thing where you're like, that's me, that's my experience, because it's from somebody. That's what art is, right? Like seeing something in yourself because it was created by somebody who understands you, because they are a part of you, right? Like they are a part of your community. And that's why, like, there's so many initiatives right now talking about like, oh, AAA needs to get more diverse, needs to have more diversity. 100% true. But to Emily's point, it's not easy to get in the industry and it's not easy to stay when it's like, and then, but the same for indie, I know many people who tried to make a game and they got burnt out because doing that by yourself without any support, especially financial support, is difficult, and it's draining, and you might have another job, like you have to keep ends meet. So like, is there really any winning, right, when it comes to making games? It's a passion of labor, but I don't think it should be, because I think that all media deserves to have the voices of like our community in them, and they deserve to be like supported for just having that voice and creating that experience for other people. So it's both have its issues, right? Both AAA and indie, unfortunately, does have issues in this industry.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Do you want to move on to the next question? Is everybody cool with that? Okay,
Sure.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about. We're talking about it from the developer's perspective, but what are the audience expectations of the LGBTQ plus representation? Zaire, do you want to start us off about this?
Yeah, I mentioned it a little earlier. I think audiences have a very vocal minority of people who are very much against inclusion of anything that's not, as we said, like a cis straight white man. But our existences aren't political, they just are. And I think that more and more people are expecting to see that kind of representation, and also expecting it to get broader as time goes on, as opposed to just having that same like, white gay guy archetype, or like Ellie in The Last of Us. We're looking for people who non-binary, intersex, trans, who aren't just white, they look like me and you. And I think that games are starting to delve into that more, but I think it also needs to be intentional and not an afterthought. It can't, like, if you're writing, like Tori said, it has to be from the beginning. The team should be from that community, not like, oh, we're wherever in our process, and we should probably bring on like a consultant who we may or may not listen to. It should, from the beginning, it should be a priority. And I think audiences are hungry for that kind of thoughtfulness and just, like I said, variety in what we're seeing, like reflecting of what the community actually is.
Definitely. I think on the kind of flip side of that, there's also an increasingly vocal part of the queer gamer community, and I know, Sisi, we had talked about this previously. So I'm gonna jump in here.
We shoot the shit so much about this.
That really, really want a lot more queer representation and is very vocal about it, which is exciting because when I think about, being a queer gamer 7, 8, 9 years ago, we weren't that vocal. We weren't yelling about what we wanted yet on a large scale. So just that alone feels like a bit of a win. But as a developer, it can be really difficult because kind of this subset of the community wants queer representation, but only if you do it absolutely right. Which, especially when you're working on a team that is probably not almost ever in, large indie or AAA going to be entirely queer, just statistically, there are things you're probably not going to get 100% right. And even if you do get things right, or if you're striving to get them right, there's part of that community that's never going to trust you because of how many games haven't gotten things exactly right. And you especially see this a lot in kind of the shipping communities of people who have been wanting queer romances in the past. I mean, there are a lot of games that tease queer romance and then don't deliver, or that provide it but don't provide it at a level that's as deep as the heterosexual or cisgendered romances in the game. And I get it. I get why people are sad and I get why people feel let down. And they're totally entitled to have those feelings. But also sometimes as a developer who's trying so hard to, not even just please, but sometimes even cater to the queer community, it can be difficult to know that you're coming in at the disadvantage of the actions of those before you, maybe who weren't queer. Like the fact of you saying, I'm queer, everybody, I'll be able to do this, I promise, I'm just like you, I care, isn't enough anymore to get people to trust you. And I don't know how to earn that trust back, and I don't know if we deserve it. It's complex. Sisi, do you want to talk about that?
I have a whole soapbox about this. I have been thinking over this soapbox for so long. I just want to say, I don't even care about doing it correct, because what is correct is often just white queerness. Honestly, every single queer person of color I talk to, we're like, oh, we love the messy. Oh, we love the villains. Oh, we love the problematic, because our lives are messy. Having a clean, beautiful picket fence kind of queerness is white privilege, frankly. A lot of us, we're struggling with immigration systems. We're struggling with the government. We are struggling to have be seen in our humanity seen in so many other ways. We've done bad things because our lives are 50 times harder. And so I personally am not just all of my queer games are problematic protagonists. They have stolen things, they have killed people, they have become a tyrant in a very specific community, or they have but these are things about power that I want to address in my games. And I personally think that it's a lot more nuanced than what a lot of the most militant white audiences necessarily want. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, in that it's just some of our lives are a lot more complicated, and it's just not going to be pretty up in a nice little box and a little bow tie on top. So I at some point, when I started making games, I was afraid of getting canceled. I was making some Twine game, which is interactive fiction game, and basically there's not really as big of an audience for it, but I was constantly worrying about every single design decision I was making. Because is this going to get me canceled? Am I going to never have the support of the LGBT community ever again? And at some point, the only reason that I managed to finish this game and submit it for an international award festival was because I didn't give a shit. I was like, screw you, you're not it's I'm this is about my traumas, and this is what, and then as an artist, this is about my traumas, and a lot of queer people write their traumas into their stories, and it hurts when people are saying that your trauma isn't good enough, or your trauma isn't sympathetic enough, or your trauma doesn't fit into a neat little box like that. And I'm just you know what, like, I just really respect anyone who wants to put that kind of pain onto their project, like no matter how messy or disagreeable that I personally find it. And I think that really the future of queer art is like not trying to like figure out if the queer rep is good enough, because then you have to judge if someone's life is good enough. And to me, that's violent and that's messy and that's unnecessary.
Yeah, I agree. And I think about that too from being a Black woman and looking at games. So often it's someone has a very particular like Black voice or Black accents, and the things that they do and the way they act are a complete stereotype. And I can't say necessarily what is a right representation, but I definitely could look at something and be like, well, that's fucking wrong. You know what I mean? And I feel like it's the same way with queer representation in games. Like I can take an earnest mistake at trying to do something right and like not quite getting there, but I can tell that you've tried, you put in the work, versus you just being like, whatever, just here's the most offensively stereotypical way that you can do something. I think they're like that like common ground of like I'm trying to do the right thing versus like I'm just gonna go with what's already out there and what's the easiest thing to just present to an audience.
Oh yeah, I wanted to clarify. Sorry, I wanted to clarify. These are my personal games, so I'm obviously a lot more like this is about my vision. So
Yeah,
like that's
passionate.
my context.
Yeah, no, for sure.
No, but
Yeah.
I think you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when you're like thinking about representation for a character, right? Especially the queer community. Right? So in the past, every queer character seemed to have a sad backstory and a sad ending, and it was literally written into TV's code, movies code, that you had to do that because it was propaganda against being queer. Okay, this character is trans and they are killed, or they are a killer, and that is because specifically you had to have that sad story to have that representation, right? So then we get into this stage where we're like, okay, well then let's not kill those characters, let's not have that romance be sad, let's not do that. But then there's also that nuance of, but I want to show the realistic side, because being queer in any country in this world, but America, the one that we're currently all in this panel, not everybody watching, I'm sure, but it isn't easy in a lot of ways. It is messy in a lot of ways, and so like, do we do this like white picket fence fairy tale castle? Yeah, everybody's happy and they're queer and it doesn't really matter. And I think maybe the answer is just like we have different like if there's enough media representation, we can show both sides in a way that feels good, right? Like I just binged She-Ra like last week, right? And that is a world that is like, it's super okay to be queer. There's tons of queer representation, and it's a kids show, which is great, right? Because like kids can see that you can be queer and be happy, and you can have a relationship and a family and things like that. But when it gets to more nuanced media, and also just showing both sides, right? Showing a character who's queer, who has struggles, but then has a community and has friends and maybe does find a happy ending despite, like, isn't that what video game protagonists are supposed to do, right? Like claw their way up to their own happiness, It's a messy subject, and it's, I think, creates a lot of fear within developers, like how the audience will react. Like, do we want to be gritty and realistic? Do we want to be like happy and idealistic? There's no easy answer. And I think the best way you can just do it is just like have a bunch of it. Have a, smorgasbord of representation that we can all partake in. It is kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like there's space for the happy stories, there's space for the tragic stories, as long as there's, a variety of things available. That's great. Like the more, the better. We're in a place where we're able to tell lots and lots of different queer stories. But you touched on a word, I think everybody said it, was fear. As a queer developer, I already have enough fear that I deal with from just dealing with the fact that I am a queer person coming into an industry that has not historically been super kind to people like me. I mean, there's always queer game developers, do not get me wrong. There were trailblazers all along doing their thing. And to also have fear of, am I doing this in a way that's going to serve everybody? Constantly. Like you just worry. And the thing that gets me about that, like, there's nothing wrong with worrying about wanting to do it right. Like, on a certain level, we should, especially, you know, like if I'm working on a character with a consultant, for example, like you do want to make sure that the voice of the character is coming through honestly and from a really, really genuine place. But at the same time, like, do I think that some of my colleagues and that some game developers even ever think about this stuff? No. Like, it ends up being on the queer people on the team to kind of carry that burden. And it often falls on whoever happens to be the most marginalized queer person on the team, which is stinky. Like, that's just bad. And it shouldn't be that way. And I want it to be better. So if you're on a team and you are not a queer person and you're working on a game that has queer characters or could have queer characters, first of all, maybe consider making the characters queer. Wonder why there aren't any queer people on your team if there aren't any queer people on your team. Don't just get one. You're not trying to fill a quota. There are lots of really good queer developers out there, and we do tend to run in packs. Find them, hire them, and like it's true though. I mean, come on, this is another thing about
all the bisexuals running around.
When do you ever see one queer person? Like, we run in groups, so if you just have one gay character in your game, that's probably not super realistic. But yeah, take some of that burden off of us by worrying for us. Don't make us do all of it. We're tired enough.
There's like one question in the chat. So before we got to the last question, I kind of scoped out. I thought we could just all answer this. I'd love to know what the conversations are like when you're designing an LGBTQ plus character. What kind of pushback is there? So I'm just going to answer this more like from like AAA, like industry studio kind of perspective. But then I'd love to hear independently making content for yourself, what that kind of conversation is with yourself and with your team, if you are working with the team about that, when it's a smaller group or if it's a more independent group. So I mean, the pushback is like we talked about fear a lot. They're going to say no. They're going to say we're too scared. We don't want the controversy. We don't want people to be mad at us if we get it wrong. We don't have the resources to do that. So you're like, okay, but I'm a queer person. I'm a queer designer, right? Can I do this? Because I think I can do this well. They're like, oh, okay. But then you're like, well, I want to create a character that's not just like a, bisexual white woman, for example, something like that. I want to create a character who's transgender, who's a person of color, something like that. So then, like you're doing that, and the question is, okay, well, I know that I should get a sensitivity reader on this, right? Somebody who's a part of that community who can tell me when I'm doing wrong, because I obviously am not, like, I might be more aware than my cisgender straight kind of colleagues about this, or my white colleagues about this, but I'm not going to be that person who's going to know all the issues and know if what I'm doing is right. So then it's like, okay, I have to go to my lead. I have to ask for the time to do this. So in the schedule, we need to have time when there can be a sensitivity reader early enough in the project or late enough in the project that has to be scoped out within time. And like, that's an expense for the company. They have to pay for that sensitivity reader. There's NDAs to be signed. It's just a pile of work that you have to kind of put onto yourself, and you have to ask that, which is why I very much believe that if we're going to get like things like sensitivity readers, which is needed 100%, that needs to come from high up in leadership, and they need to say that. The studio needs to say as a whole, we are going to not just want this diverse content, we are going to support it, because a junior or associate level, they don't have the power to make that call. Even if they said, I will out of my pocket hire my friend to do this for me, right? So it's just, there's NDAs to be signed, there's conversations to be had with higher ups, producers need to get involved. That's the kind of pushback you get, unfortunately. And I know there are studios out there, I'm not saying all AAA says no to that, because I know there are studios who do hire like diversity readers. I know GLAAD, GLAAD, the group, does do that, and they do it for free because that's part of their mission to create media. So like if you want to get somebody in for free, like if that's a cost, like you can totally like contact them and things like that. It's not impossible.
You should definitely pay queer people, especially queer people of color.
Yeah.
It's a quick.
Yes,
anyway.
obviously, if it's queer content, get a queer diversity reader. If it's a person of color that you are writing for, get a person of color to be your diversity reader, things like that. But yeah, that's the kind of pushback you get, that it's an expense and you have to ask for it. I think that's probably the biggest kind of pushback you get, because like I do think companies do want it. I think that they're scared about the pushback, and I don't know if they're all willing to give the cost to like negate it. Yeah. If anybody else wants to jump in about like their personal experience creating those characters and kind of like what that's all about, jump right in.
Zaire, do you have anything to add, or?
I haven't worked with a team yet beyond like game jams, either in indie or AAA. For games that I've written for myself, I feel like the pushback has always been more internal. I come from like a very strong religious background, so it's always like, oh God, what if my pastor mom and my pastor grandpa find my gay story, type thing. And like trying to figure out how to like break through some of those like internal issues, and then like it's I don't know how to describe it. For me, it's been like a freeing thing, like a discovering thing, being able to share it with people that I've come to know over the internet. But I can't speak for like the pushback from an actual like say multi-billion-dollar corporation. I can only speak from like my own smaller experience trying to do stuff in like Twine.
Totally
That's so
valid
important, though. Yeah,
it's still important to talk about. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, Twine is where a lot of the innovation comes from.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Are we all comfortable doing this last question, or anybody want to jump in before that?
Oh, right. I should probably. I actually can't really keep track of who's been, like, if I've even talked during this round or that last round.
Yes. So the question is, like, designing LGBTQ plus characters, like, what's your process or pushback or
that's my favorite part. I love designing messy Chinese characters because I can't screw it up. But if it's like a different ethnicity, like I have a mixed Arab character and like a Haitian American character, I'm gonna treat those characters with a lot more care. Like I'm not gonna go off the rails. Like I love going off the rails with Chinese characters. Like yeah, they're messy, they're all over the place messy. But if it's like if it's like a different queer person with like an entirely different set of experiences, I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to make sure that I find someone at the end to like, or even in the middle, actually usually in the start, but I'm trying to like figure out how the budgeting will work. But like usually like I will definitely make a very concerted effort to find somebody to make sure that I am not completely screwing it up. And like obviously I think it's important to write, like I love queer darkness. It's like one of my favorite things ever. But I think that queer darkness should only be handled by the people who are of that identity, because the possibility for screwing it up is so high and the cost of screwing it up is so high that I will only stick within my lane for the darkness. And if I wanted darkness from like a different kind of LGBT person, then I will probably find some way to like pay them to like consult, or like just straight up pay them to write the thing, instead of like figuring out that I can somehow navigate the darkness by myself, because I can't. And I think the only way that this representation can move forward is if we like acknowledge as writers our own limitations, that there's some things that I just can't do, or at least not by myself I can't do. And there's a certain kind of story that I should just straight up be like, please, we'll pay you to write it. So that's kind of my take on it. But otherwise, yeah, there's a lot of fear. I'm like, I say I don't care about screwing up, but I am scared of screwing up constantly. And to some extent, I just have to be like, I'm not going to listen to like these fears of thinking that like I'm going to screw up my own identity, because I can't do that. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, and going off Sisi, I think queer people of color are able to write like within their own identity white characters of that same identity, but I don't think that white creators can on their own cross that boundary to write a queer person of color, because as people of color, we have to exist within the framework of America's just like capitalistic, colonialistic framework. Like that's whiteness is the standard. And so like I understand your like culture, but like come to a barbecue at my church or at my house or something and tell me like how well you can navigate that. And I bet it's not nearly as simple for you because you're not used to having to put on that kind of thing. And I think, and I agree with Sisi on that point.
We have another question. I thought we'd just do this real quick. If you have trans characters in your story, should a team pull from the experience of trans team members alone, or should they also equally use a sensitivity reader, diversity consultant equally? I would say ask that member of your team how comfortable they are in that position, especially if, for example, the trans person is like a person of color as well, and they are a white person, right? Or it's a trans man and they are a trans woman, or it's a non-bi. If they're comfortable with that, I would totally consult with them about it first and like ask like what do you think pulling from. But I also think that consultant like one person, even if they are exactly that, like, do I know every issue within the bisexual community? No, for sure. So like and a consultant will be like literally like that's their life work, that is what they do. So I would say like, if you have the budget and ability to hire a consultant, I would definitely say yes to that, just because like that's their job, and somebody who's a team member might not feel comfortable being that voice. Just personally, that's fine. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
Oh yeah.
I mean, sometimes.
Sorry, go ahead, Sisi.
Okay, well, sometimes you don't necessarily have a budget in indie, and that's kind of one of the scary parts about working indie. Like sometimes you're like, do we have consulting budget? And they're like, no, and I'm just like, okay, so this is really scary. And it's like you want to be diverse, but you don't have the money to do so, and that is just terrifying. I don't think we don't have any clear-cut answers to what happens if you don't have money, because you also don't want to just have like 5 gay dudes in a lineup. So that's definitely a question that we still need to figure out. And like, I mean, it just is tied to the bigger question of like a lot of queer developers are struggling to like find financing, which is like a much bigger problem overall that like encompasses every other one of our problems.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we are almost.
Can I mention one quick thing on this topic?
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. Just if you have somebody on your team who fits, the kind of marginalized identity of a character that you're writing or creating, like Tori said, ask them if they're willing to consult, but also feel out whether or not you should ask them. I've been in some situations where I've seen someone ask like a programmer to help them write a character, or an HR person, or and that's not their job. Like all 4 of us on this panel all work in narrative aspects, but a lot of people have nothing to do with writing and don't want to have anything to do with writing, and they don't want to be like the person that you go to with every trans question. Like they're just there to do accounting or whatever.
Right.
So feel that out. Don't just assume that you're going to be able to go to your team member.
Yeah, definitely. But I'll say like the diversity within your creative teams is also like super important, just like because those are people creating the story.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. We're at 43 minutes. So we're gonna do this last question, rapid fire. What are your expectations of LGBTQ plus representation in games going forward? Either your expectations or your hopes. Either way.
As someone who came out later in life, I think I want to see more stories that are dealing with that particular aspect of being queer, where they're not safe to do it. Maybe they have to, deprogram themselves to accept that, like, hey, this is me. That's kind of how I am. I grew up in the church, and I was like, had inklings, but it's usually like a teenager who's like finally like, oh yeah, this is me. And maybe someone, I was like 26 or something, I don't remember when I came out, but someone who's a little older, maybe a little more established in their life, and dealing with the fallout and the changes that come from that. I think I would like to see just a wider breadth of stories that deal with that aspect.
Yeah, I just want to see more. I want more of it, and I want more of it from every part of the industry. And I want indie games made by queer people to be taken as seriously as AAA. Like, it's great when Blizzard retroactively decides 2 years later that a character was queer all along. Like, that is still representation, and I'm glad we got it. But I wish we would celebrate the strides made by smaller developers the same way we celebrate the crumbs that we are given by big studios.
Yeah, like we're out here, like half my friends are in indie, and we're making stuff out of like shoestring budgets, and we could be making so much more stuff if we were offered more than shoestring budgets. And I don't know how to fix the money problem because I'm just paid to care about narrative, but we need to fix the money problem really, really bad. And like, sorry, I accidentally like soapboxed on your ending, like, but like, yeah, the money is just like, okay, I realize this is part of a question about what do you want to see. So I guess part of what I wanted to see was more money, because like there's people making incredible stuff out there you've never heard of because their marketing budget is like not very big. And I personally, like, I guess from like a narrative perspective, I'm a little bit more thinking about like, you know what was really weird? It's like when I was in college, it's like all of my friends, no, I didn't have any white gay friends. Like I'm like, I had Asian gay friends. We didn't hang out with the white gay people, and it's really weird to me that like there's no like queer people of color romance between two people of color like ever, and it's always like a white person and a queer person of color, and that's weird to me because I was like I didn't even know any like white gay people to like hang out with. So like to me like realism would also be like not centering, like just be totally, you can decenter from white gay people and it'll be fine. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I just hope to see more and more big of a range, and for the community, for the audiences, for the industry people to come better to like a happier conclusion, I suppose, right? Like that will just, it'll be better. It'll be more, and it'll be something that our community can be really proud of and be really excited about. Like everybody, right? All right, so I think we're out of time. So thank everybody who came to see the stream. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for my lovely other panelists for agreeing to do this and for this conversation. It's been awesome. Totally. You can find me at Tori_Schafer at Twitter. If you guys ever want, like, if anybody watching has questions, feel free to message it on Twitter. My DMs are open.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for inviting me to the panel. It was fun. You can find me on Twitter at Zaire Lanier, Lanier. And if you're interested, you can check out my Kickstarter, The Bone Herder, as well. I think it's pretty cool. And yeah.
Sure, I'll go next. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to all of us talking about this. I really appreciate that people are interested and, want to know what's going on, want to know how we can all get better. So once again, I'm Emily Grace Buck. My Twitter handle is Emily Buckshot. And we just dropped The Waylanders. Please go buy it in early access on Steam. It's got lots of queer content. You can even be non-binary or trans. Go buy it, please. It's fun. It's broken right now. It's early access, but it's fun. Support us. Thanks.
All of our projects are broken. Hi. I guess I'm Sisi, and my Twitter is SIX6, the number 6, and then JIANG. But honestly, you can just Google Lion Killer instead and find all of my bios there, because it's like an internationally nominated game, so it's like. The SEO is pretty good. So you should just Google Lion Killer and like find all my other stuff from there. So thanks. Peace.
Oh, and if you like PvP games, check out playspellbreak.com and join the beta. Should be a battle maging wizard who gets to fight other wizards with elemental stuff. It's really cool. If you like PvP, you will love it for sure. And it will have narrative eventually. I could guarantee. All right. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah.